Welcome to part 3 of this Transforming Worship Simple Guide to Planning and Leading Worship. I'm Helen Bent, and in this third session, I'm going to be looking at the practicalities of what actually happens on the day, how we prepare ourselves beforehand, and then what happens during the service itself. We said at the beginning of the course that worship is at the heart of what we do as Christians. It is both a privilege and a responsibility to lead others in worship. This final session is all about confident leadership. In this session, we will look at different aspects of upfront leadership. What skills are required? How do we ensure we communicate clearly? How do we build up rapport with the congregation and remain sensitive to their needs? And how do we ensure others play their part at the right time and in the right place? There is a lot to learn and remember, but these skills will become honed through practice and wider experience. This session will follow the same pattern as the previous two. There will be a little input and then a chance to pause and think about what you've heard with some questions to guide you. You'll find it helpful to have a copy of the sample service handout in front of you during this session. This provides you with an outlined service of the word to consider as we go along. By the end of the session, you will have been introduced to various practical skills needed to lead worship with humility and confidence. These are really important if we're going to lead people into God's presence without getting in the way. I have found the analogy of driving a car a really useful way of looking at the liturgical task of leading worship. It's not my original idea. It's borrowed from a Baptist minister, friend and colleague, Chris Ellis, whose books you will find in the further reading list. Driving a car is a good example of multitasking, and leading worship involves liturgical multitasking. We all have experience of travelling in a car before we learn to drive. We can think of long journeys and short ones, direct or scenic routes, and we can remember enjoyable journeys and uncomfortable ones. Leading worship is similar. We all have experience of participating in worship before we are asked to lead it. When we first start to drive, we don't have to learn everything about cars, but we do have to know some basics. We get familiar with the dashboard, the control, the pedals, how to steer and how to use the mirrors. In the same way, in session 1, we learnt some basics about worship, so we had some clear understanding of the task before us. In both cases, our understanding and knowledge expand as we gain experience. Nowadays, we might look at a map book to get an overview of the journey, then put our location and destination into the sat-nav to get the detail. In session 2, we thought about planning the journey of worship, giving particular care to the starting point and the final destination. We then considered the route in detail and whether the participants would enjoy a smooth ride. Next, we have to consider the needs of those travelling with us. Who will be joining us on the journey? Are they all adult passengers, or do we have children or teenagers in the car? As the driver, we will do everything we can to ensure their well-being on the journey and their safe arrival at their final destination. Similarly in worship, who will be joining us on the journey? This might vary hugely from week to week, and we might not always know in advance, but it's worth considering the possibilities. We might be all adults, but we might be a more mixed intergenerational congregation. We might have visitors, a couple coming for their bands, or a family with a new baby exploring baptism. Whoever journeys with us, we want them to feel welcome, comfortable and relaxed. Lastly, driving itself requires a confident start, smooth gear changes, good clutch and brake control, the ability to slow down and speed up, and the ability to stop gently and safely. We keep our focus on the road in front and our direction of travel, paying attention to the road signs along the way. Others are travelling the same route with us, and we maintain an awareness of what they are doing too. Again, we can see similarities. A service too needs a confident start. We then move through the service with our focus on the direction of travel, getting a sense of pace as we go. Orders of service and hymn boards help to guide us through. Others travel the same route, contributing readings and prayers at different points. In both driving and leading worship, we are drawing on multiple skills at the same time. Our role on the day is different to that of the congregation, so it is helpful to put yourself in their place and think through the service beforehand. Mentally live the service as a whole, imagining how it will be received by the participants. You might find it helpful to refer to the sample order of service provided to give you something tangible to work with. On the day, minimise the number of books and papers given out to avoid distraction or confusion. Ask yourself, what is likely to be the predominant mood of the congregation? There are seasonal differences. The mood will be different during Remembrance Tide compared to Christmas. The expectations quite different on Good Friday in contrast to Easter Sunday. During ordinary time, it's tempting to simply go with the flow, but it is worth considering whether anything has happened in the local community, in the country, or in the world news to excite or upset. In terms of pace and flow, where are the natural pauses? Look at the sample order of service, which is designed for an all-age service during ordinary time. As worship leader, you will set the tone and pace, but you will also be reliant on those doing the readings, leading the prayers, and providing the music to contribute sensitively in the appropriate places. The talk will usually encapsulate the main themes of the service. So what might be an appropriate response after the talk? Will it naturally lead into praise or prayer, or an affirmation of faith, or perhaps a period of silent reflection before we move on? How might the music connect with other ingredients? We've already considered in session 2 that music has the capacity to enhance the flow of the service. It's worth thinking about how to introduce the next hymn without disturbing the flow. Read through the words and see which ones will particularly resonate at this point in the service. What will be the predominant mood at the end? Ideally, we want to send everyone out feeling uplifted, ready and prepared to continue to live out their Christian faith during the coming week. How people feel when they leave can be greatly affected by timing, so it's worth paying particular attention to this. People will get fidgety if they think the service has gone on too long. There are some important questions to ask. Again, refer to the sample order of service to give you some idea. How long will the service last? And perhaps more important, how long do the congregation expect it to last? Start on time and finish on time, or even finish a little early. It's always better to leave the congregation wanting more rather than looking at their watches and wondering how much longer to the end. How long will each part take? Try timing the various parts by reading them out loud. It takes longer to read things out loud, and this will also help to give you more confidence on the day. How much time will the music add? This is where timing can readily go astray depending on the choice of hymns, the length of verses and the number of verses. It might be simply a case of missing out some of the verses, but be careful not to upset the theological flow or biblical storyline. Older hymn books used to mark verses that could be missed out with an asterisk. Newer worship songs can also add time with repeats and an additional bridge. Then what about banns of marriage? This is an important legal requirement before a wedding, and it is a moment of great significance for the couple if they are present. Be careful that banns carry a certain gravitas, not passed over too quickly at the beginning of a service to get them out of the way, or tagged onto the notices at the end as if they don't matter. This is a big moment for the couple, so pastorally, banns might fit better next to the prayers, with a prayer said for the couple after the banns have been called. Finally, what about the notices? If everyone has been handed the notices on a sheet already, it begs the question whether we need to go through them all again. On the other hand, drawing attention to one or two can affirm a sense of community. It's time to pause now for the first set of questions. How does the image of driving a car help you to understand the task set before you? What are the biggest challenges for you as you prepare to lead the congregation in worship, and how might you overcome them? Everyone is called to worship, but some of us will have particular ministries and responsibilities during a service. Let's look at the role of leader first, especially when they are up front and visible. First of all, prepare yourself. You have prepared your material carefully and prayerfully earlier in the week, but what happens when we get to the day? Try to remain prayerful amongst the pre-church hustle and bustle to counter any nervousness. When you get to church, try to keep focused on the service and avoid getting sidetracked with other business which will wait until afterwards. Dress appropriately. As a lay leader, you probably won't be expected to wear robes, but that begs the question, what do you wear and what is appropriate? This will vary from service to service. A good rule of thumb is the more formal the service, the more formal the dress code. Smart casual may be fitting for a less formal all-age service, whereas jeans and t-shirt might be perfectly acceptable for messy church or forest church. Then think through the choreography. How will the congregation know that the service is beginning or ending? Where will you stand to lead the service, and how will you get there at the beginning? It might be a prayer desk in the chancel, or it might be a lectern at the front of the nave. This might be dictated by the position of the microphones. But if you are using a lectern, think about where you're going to sit and whether you are going to move anywhere else during the service. And what will you do at the end of the service? Will you go to the door to talk to the congregation as they leave, or will you return to the vestry? Consider your body language. Our posture and gestures need to match our words if we are going to be genuinely inclusive and welcoming towards everyone. If we're not too sure what to do with our hands, it's tempting to put a hand in a pocket. But this looks a bit too casual and may give the impression we are not fully engaged in what's happening. Some of us use our hands to communicate, especially when we become animated. But beware, too much hand movement may be distracting. Also, watch out for annoying habits. It might be putting on or taking off reading glasses, or pushing loose glasses back into position on your nose, or swapping papers from one hand to the other, especially when we're nervous. Get a bit of honest feedback from a trusted friend, and if you are very brave, ask someone to record you in action. Then play the recording on fast forward. Any quirks soon stand out. As a leader, we have a responsibility to preside over worship, but others also have their parts to play. Worship is a drama where all are participants. A congregation is not the same as an audience. We want to encourage them to fully engage rather than coming to be passively entertained. Participation can be encouraged by changes of posture. Refer back to the sample order of service. Where will people stand or sit or kneel? Some congregations will be used to standing up as the minister enters. For others, it's helpful to invite them to stand at the beginning for the greeting. This demonstrates a respect for God, but also an expectancy and alertness. We are present, attentive, and ready to worship. Kneeling is a position of reverence and adoration. The Book of Common Prayer instructs us to come to confession meekly kneeling. It demonstrates an attitude of both devotion and submission to God. People may also kneel for the intercessions and to receive Holy Communion. Today, sitting seems to have become the default posture for confession and prayer, and when we're not sure what else to do. But I can find little biblical evidence for it as a posture for worship, even during the sermon. In the Bible, rabbis sat down to teach, but not the congregation. Choreography for the congregation should also be considered. A congregation doesn't want to remain standing, seated or kneeling for too long at a time, but nor do they want to change positions so often that they get seasick. Worship might also involve movement to a different part of the building. Babies and toddlers to a creche area, children to their Sunday club, or whole congregation participation in a procession or move to prayer stations set out around the church. When movement involves a whole congregation, it's worth remembering that the greater the number of people involved, the longer the movement will take. At the beginning of any service, it's important to build up a rapport with the congregation. We want to help them to worship and to meet with God rather than drawing too much attention to ourselves. It's useful to consider how we see ourselves and our role. Are you the worship leader or the lead worshipper? We clearly have a different role to those in the congregation. Worship leading is a ministry of encouragement and enabling, but at the same time, we are still worshippers too. We are lead worshippers together with other worshippers, all being guided and inspired by the Holy Spirit. That said, we have the holding brief to oversee what is going on. We cannot be so lost in wonder, love and praise that we forget the rest of the congregation. Rapport is all about remaining alert and carrying the people with us. We have a responsibility to put people at their ease. So remember to smile. A smile is infectious and welcoming and will draw people in. Also, a few clear instructions can go a long way to help people relax and settle into the service. Include everyone, regardless of age, gender and ethnicity. Also be aware of disability and accessibility. Not everyone can physically stand or kneel, nor is this issue confined to the elderly. A young mum with a toddler may find it much easier to participate sitting down. Any prayer station should be at a suitable height for everyone to access safely. If a service is being live streamed or recorded, then don't forget to welcome those joining online and remember to look at the camera while you do so. Give permission to people to engage or not as appropriate. It has become an accepted norm to invite the congregation to stand if they are able. Standing for corporate singing may be normal for regular churchgoers, but quite alien to visitors. A little gentle explanation and encouragement can go a long way towards helping everyone take part as fully as possible. Maintain good eye contact. Don't be afraid to look directly at members of the congregation. Try to connect with everyone, but home in on the ones who are responsive. This will encourage you and boost your confidence. Lastly, consider your approach. Are you more comfortable with a formal or informal style? Depending on personality, we will warm to one more than the other. However, a worship leader is not the same as a chat show host. We want to put people at their ease and develop rapport, but leading worship is a weighty responsibility which needs to be approached with due dignity and reverence, even when the style is informal. It's time now for some more questions. Reflect on the sample order of service in terms of your own leadership. How will you encourage full congregational participation and build rapport? What can you do to help worshippers focus on God, not on you as worship leader? We're getting more and more practical here, so let's move on to think about words and choosing words with care. Look again at the sample order of service. What else might be needed in order to deliver this service with sensitivity and meaning? First of all, let's consider the words of the leader. Some additional words will be necessary to help the service to flow smoothly. Use appropriate language for the congregation and try to avoid too much Christian jargon or church terminology. Part of our role is to communicate information clearly. Which book we need, hymn numbers or page numbers. It's useful to give numbers twice in case anyone missed them the first time. A little instruction or explanation can be helpful, especially for visitors, so that they know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. A cathedral service or big formal occasion will often proceed unannounced. Here the instructions are provided by the rubrics and the liturgy provides the links and continuity. In the local church, we may need to offer a little more guidance, but make every word count. Are we being repetitive, saying the same thing twice, once informally and then again formally in the words of the liturgy? And does everyone really need to know that the next hymn is my auntie's favourite? Much better to draw attention to a pertinent line in the hymn or link it with one of the readings. Also, avoid words like just and so, which are classic pitfalls of informality. These can readily creep into announcements and prayers, but we have an important job to do and we don't have to be apologetic. Remember, we worship the Almighty, not the Almighty. Then let's consider the words of the congregation. Be careful which words you put on the lips of others, and allow people time to engage with the liturgy and think about what they are saying. As the service progresses, enable the congregation to respond with integrity. Recognise that they are at different points in their relationship with God, and consider whether they can assent to the words that they are saying or singing with a resounding Amen. When we're leading the service, it's important to think about voice projection. Posture will help. Stand tall with your head up, even when you are leading prayers. As soon as you drop your head, certain words will get lost. Speak to the congregation rather than to the lectern. Speak naturally. Your natural voice is much easier to listen to than an affected monotone or anything overly theatrical. Speak slowly and clearly. This comes with confidence and experience. When we are nervous, we tend to speak more quickly. However, liturgy and prayers need to be carefully paced, especially if we expect others to join in with us. Think about phrasing carefully and use pauses to allow everyone time to breathe. Use a microphone if available. This really helps the hard of hearing and those using the church induction loop for hearing aids. Ideally, practice with a microphone beforehand. You need to speak straight into a directional microphone. Drop your head and some clarity may be lost. A condenser microphone is more sensitive and will therefore pick up more detail. The microphone should be the correct distance from your mouth. Too close and it may become boomy and distorted with an occasional pop when you say certain consonants like B's and P's. A good rule of thumb is 6 to 12 inches away. Beware. A microphone can make you louder, but not necessarily clearer. You still need to project your voice and speak slowly and clearly. It is more than likely as a worship leader that you will be involving others in the service, to read, to lead prayers, or to prepare an activity. Again, you might want to refer to the sample order of service. As a worship leader, we need to know who is reading and to check beforehand that they have the correct Bible text in the correct version. Is the Bible they use to practice at home the same as the lectern Bible, or will they trip over the words if it's slightly different? A dramatised reading can be a refreshing change, especially in an all-age service. It can also be a good way of involving a family or a group of people, but it will require practice beforehand. In the same way, prayers may be led by others, an individual, a family, or a group. These could be formal intercessions from common worship or specially written for the occasion. Alternatively, these could be interactive, involving petitions written by the congregation and gathered into a basket or placed before a central cross. In some services, a series of prayer stations could be used with members of the congregation moving freely between them. Whatever form prayer takes, it's helpful to communicate the themes of the service to those leading prayers so that the whole service coheres. In an all-age service, we may want to include an activity. This might be an activity for the children, or it might be something for everyone. A children's activity might engage youngsters at an appropriate level alongside an adult talk, or an activity for everyone might be a natural conclusion or response to the talk. When will any related instructions be communicated, and by whom? Involving others is likely to require them using the microphones, so get them together early to rehearse. Think about the practicalities, especially differences in height if a group of people are sharing the same microphone, to avoid intrusive noise or distraction. We've covered some really practical skills and suggestions here, so it's time to take stock. What stands out to you which you hadn't thought about before. Which practical skills do you find most challenging? In this final section, we're going to think about the worship leader as pastor, with pastoral sensitivity to others. Many services have all ages present some of the time, even if the children and young people are few or go off to separate activities for part of the service. It's good to involve them with readings, prayers, and welcoming to deepen their sense of belonging and encourage ownership. It is their church as much as ours. Also be attentive to their particular prayer needs. A small child's grazed knees are just as important as an elderly person's arthritic knees. A young person's first broken relationship can feel as devastating as a separation in later life. Signage regularly reminds us that not every disability is visible. Those with impaired sight are not readily noticed unless they carry a white stick, but they will benefit from large print books. If we suggest people close their eyes to pray, we will be removing a second sense from the deaf person who relies on lip reading as well as their hearing aids. And just because the church has a hearing loop, don't assume it works. Check with someone who wears an aid. Someone in a wheelchair is more obvious, but they might be too low down to see all the action at the front and have limited access to parts of the church. We need to watch out for vulnerability. We can all be vulnerable at different times, when we have been bereaved, lost a job, or we are facing long-term illness ourselves or in the family. Issues of mental health and depression can easily go unnoticed, so watch out for anyone who seems more withdrawn than usual during the service. It's also worth considering different spiritual styles. We don't all relate to God in the same way. Some people love words and relate to God through words, but others meet with God when their emotions are stirred. Some people are drawn to God through symbols and symbolic actions, so reflecting on an image or lighting a candle might be helpful. Others are doers. They like action and may be passionate about world affairs, justice and peace. Closely related to this are different learning styles. If we are not careful, a service can be a series of words, words, words. Expanding our experience of worship to include seeing and doing through activity or movement will help everyone engage more fully. Raised awareness of all these aspects will help us to respond to the congregation with greater pastoral understanding and care, sending them out from worship uplifted and strengthened for the week ahead. We often say at the end of a service, "Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. In the name of Christ, Amen." We've already thought about the mood of the congregation when they arrive, but what has been happening to them during the service, and what will be the general mood when they leave? Worship is all about relationship. First and foremost, we want to encourage relationship with God, who is worthy of our praise and who wants to speak to his people. We want to send people out knowing that they have met with God in some way. We want to encourage relationship with each other. Worship is a corporate activity. There is a solidarity between worshippers and a sharing of one another's joys and sorrows before God. We want to send people out uplifted and strengthened, knowing that they are not facing the new week alone. As we worship together, we become reconnected with the wider Christian church. In session 2, we talked about common worship. Others elsewhere will also be engaging in worship, using the same shared patterns and familiar words, the same themes and Bible readings as us. We want to remind one another that we are part of a church that is much bigger than our own parish or benefice. Beyond that, we also connect with the wider world, remembering its needs and our responsibilities, particularly during the intercessions. Ideally, we want to send everyone out feeling positive and refreshed, ready and prepared to serve God in the coming week. Worship is more than an hour set aside on a Sunday. We are called to a life of everyday worship, offering ourselves to God as a living sacrifice, which is our true spiritual worship, 24/7, Monday to Saturday. Church congregations can be made up of a wide mix of people from different backgrounds with very different worship experiences. It is not unusual to find various other denominations worshipping alongside the Anglicans, especially in a village setting. Each person will have their own expectations and preferences. These views need to be acknowledged and respected, but they can sometimes prove frustrating and disheartening to the worship leader, especially when expressed loudly at the end of a service. I have found Paul's instruction to the Philippians helpful here. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul writes, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others." This is a good place to start. If we recognise the various theologies, traditions and styles represented within the congregation, we are halfway to helping them to worship together in harmony. Aim to have the same attitude as Jesus, where the role of worship leader is not a position of power to be exploited. Humility is key. Jesus emptied himself and took on the role of servant. We too are called to love and serve the congregation, journeying together with them in worship. We are also called to do everything without grumbling, sometimes easier said than done when someone is unduly critical at the end of a service. We have a responsibility to discern what is happening as we journey together. Throughout the service, be alert to what is happening. Is the congregation fully involved? Or are some distracted and losing interest? Are there particularly noisy children disturbing the flow? A quiet pause can be a helpful way to settle the children and to refocus everyone on God. At the same time, listen for the promptings of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the one who ultimately enables us to worship in spirit and in truth. Accept feedback. We ourselves are not always the best judge of how a service went. A few encouraging comments can really boost our confidence. None of us likes criticism, even the most constructive, but sometimes we do need to hear constructive ways to improve our leadership skills. It's easy to dissect services which don't go so well, but also learn from the good ones. Review each service afterwards and ask for some honest feedback from others you trust. Finally, as you continue to reflect on this ministry, remember, God is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. This session has been all about upfront practical skills. Here are some final questions to think about. What do you think you need to work on most to become an effective worship leader? How will you reflect and review at the end of a service? Consider honestly the positives, negatives, strengths and weaknesses. Thank you for using this Transforming Worship simple guide to planning and leading worship. You can find accompanying resources to this session online in easy downloadable form. There is an additional handout of top tips for worship leaders, a worship review sheet, and a further reading list for the whole course with useful books and websites to help you in planning and leading worship. If you found the sessions useful, why not become a member of Transforming Worship? Visit our website transformingworship.news and follow the link for joining. This will enable you to keep up to date with topical worship and liturgy issues through our quarterly magazine, Transforming Worship News. This also includes all the latest information about further training. We offer a range of training, nationally and regionally, both online and in person, so do come and join us.